Now, from CBS News Miami, this is Facing South Florida with Jim Defede.
Welcome to Facing South Florida. I'm Jim Defede, and we begin with an update on the criminal investigation into Hope, Florida, and an important question that needs to be asked. Is Florida Attorney General James Uthmeier trying to hide the grand jury report into the scandal? You'll hear his non-answer in a moment, but before we get there, a quick reminder about what's been happening. Last year, a grand jury was impaneled in Leon County to investigate possible criminal wrongdoing after the DeSantis Administration secretly diverted $10 million from a Medicaid settlement into the Hope Florida Foundation. That was taxpayer money that eventually ended up in a political action committee controlled by Uthmeier and used as part of the governor's campaign against the marijuana amendment in 2024. At the time that money was diverted, Uthmeier was DeSantis' chief of staff. But since then, DeSantis appointed Uthmeier to be the state's attorney general, and as a result, Uthmeier is facing the voters for the very first time this November. It appears the grand jury probe wrapped up earlier this year, and normally the grand jury's findings will be made public so that we could all understand what actually happened. But the report hasn't been released, leaving some to wonder if some of the people named in the report, like Uthmeier, have secretly petitioned the court in Tallahassee to keep the report locked away so that no one can ever see it. So this week, when Uthmeier was in Miami for a press conference, he was asked if he petitioned the court to keep the findings secret, and this is how he answered.
I don't think anybody cares about this topic any more than the liberal media. There was a grand jury proceeding under Florida law. The contents thereof are confidential. That's not my choice. That is Florida law. What I can tell you is I have not been indicted. I've not been a suspect or a target. I've not been involved in any criminal activity. Nobody did anything wrong here. I think you had I think what I said in the past is a nothing burger complaint that's been politically motivated. At the end of the day, there's nothing there. I think that's been made pretty clear. And if you have any other specific questions, you'll have to go to the state attorney there. I will say Leon County is kind of like Washington, D.C. If there's any hint, any remote sense of criminal activity, like they'll indict a ham sandwich. So that hasn't happened. I think that tells you all you need to know. The media is the only one still talking about this.
If you notice, he didn't actually answer the question. And when a reporter asked again if he was okay with the grand jury report being made public, he attacked the reporter who asked the question. It's starting to seem like our attorney general might have something to hide. But even if he doesn't, the idea that nobody cares about how $10 million of taxpayer money was used as part of a dark money campaign to influence an election, well, that's amazing in and of itself. Now, I sent Uthmeier a text to see if he would like to answer the question directly or even come on the show to clear up the controversy, but he didn't respond. I did speak to the man who is running against Uthmeier this fall, former State Senator Jose Javier Rodriguez, and you'll hear that in a few moments. But first, I spoke to the two reporters who exposed the Hope, Florida scandal, Lawrence Mower of the Tampa Bay Times and Alexandra Glorioso of the Miami Herald.
Well, what we think is that the grand jury has chosen not to indict someone, and instead they've chosen to issue a presentment, which is basically a report of the grand jury's findings. It's fairly rare, but it's used in instances where, well, we don't really want to indict someone, but we've found wrongdoing here that we think the public needs to know about. These reports can often have, like recommendations. It'll provide far more details about their investigation than an indictment would. And so we think that report has been issued, and that started a 15-day clock under state law that says, basically people named in it have a chance to ask a judge to repress or basically redact parts or all of that report.
Do we have any idea for when that 15-day clock would have started, or we don't actually even know that at this point?
We don't know exactly when that was, but
we started hearing about it in late January, and in early February, I believe it was on February 4th, we asked Attorney General James Uthmeier in the Florida Capitol whether he had seen the report, when he had received the presentment, I think is specifically what we asked. And he didn't deny it at that point. He said at that time, I'm not sure what I can say, and you'll need to direct your questions to the state attorney's office.
One thing I will say is, Lawrence, you said that it's unusual to issue these reports. I will tell you, in Miami-Dade County, that's something the state attorney's office has done often, is avoid criminally charging someone, but then trying to issue lengthy reports to try to affect change going forward, so that the mistakes of the past aren't repeated and the system works better. We've seen that a number of times in Miami, but the purpose of it only works if that report is made public. It only works if the people who are in positions of power see the report and then act on it, the recommendations that are included in it. So it would seem self-defeating for the court or for the grand jury process to be inhibited by either the Attorney General or anyone else if they have, in fact, blocked this report from coming out.
Yeah, and to your point, Jim, it's very unusual for these reports to be redacted for that reason. The cases that we reviewed and the legal opinions that we reviewed on these grand jury presentments really favor releasing these reports because these are not coming usually with charges. They're not coming usually with indictments. It's a public citizenry process. And the judges have given the citizens who participate in these reports great latitude in what they're able to criticize regarding public officials and public entities.
Obviously, you saw how the Attorney General responded to all this, basically dismissing the notion that anyone still cares about what happened to Hope, Florida. But again, this is $10 million in taxpayer money that was routed away from the state coffers and into these political action committees ultimately. That is something I think when the Attorney General starts saying that no one in the public cares about $10 million of taxpayer money being siphoned away from taxpayer benefit, I think that's troubling in and of itself. What was your reaction to listening to Uthmeier the other day?
Well, basically that's kind of what he's going to say. The idea that no one cares about it. I mean, the legislature definitely cares. They changed state law last year to say you can't do this anymore. There's a number of top Republicans and people in this state who are extremely aware of what happened and really want to know more. They want to get to the bottom of this. The Attorney General has never answered questions about what exactly was his role in this whole thing. He appears to have been involved from literally the very beginning of the Centene settlement, and also, his political committee was obviously the one getting most of that $10 million. So there are serious questions here. Who was involved? Who did what? What did he do? That I think a lot of people want to know. And of course, at this point, this is an election issue. He's up for election this year. And this report, a lot of people think, should be released in time for that election.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of that, the Attorney General has never been elected to his position. He was the governor's chief of staff. So the governor appointed him to the Attorney General position after Ashley Moody vacated office to run for the Senate. And he's never faced public questions about this until now, and this is the first time that he's going to be on the ballot. So the fact that this report could be kept secret until after the election is of great public importance and concern.
You both wrote recently that regardless of what the grand jury may have done, that there is still the potential of the Internal Revenue Service, the federal IRS, taking some interest in all of this when Hope, Florida is required to file their tax returns at some point this year. Talk to me a little bit about that. What do you think is the concerning element of their tax filing and what that could portend for the group?
So there are two concerns about the tax filing. For one thing, this is going to be the first time on their 990 that they will have accounted for the $10 million and how it was spent. And IRS auditors could potentially look at whether that money was spent either as lobbying or as politics. A charity like the Hope Florida Foundation can spend a limited amount of money on lobbying, but if the IRS determines that $10 million or even most of it was spent on lobbying, such as against the ballot initiatives, which is what they would consider lobbying, then it's likely to be too excessive to meet IRS rules because it is by far the most money that the charity has ever spent. And some of the money appears to have gone to the Republican Party of Florida, or even potentially the governor's own personal political committee, the Florida Freedom Fund. And in that case, if any of that money ended up being spent on a candidate, that would be considered political spending, and that is outright banned under the IRS rules for a 501c3 charity like the Hope Florida Foundation.
I mean, yeah, some of this money might have actually ended up in Uthmeier's own political account. If you trace the money, you know, the Chamber of Commerce's organization got $5 million from the Hope Florida Foundation. They gave $3.75 million of that money to Uthmeier's committee. And the rest of it, the remaining 1.25, we don't really know where it went. However, on the same day they were transferring money to Uthmeier's committee, they also transferred $1 million to their own network of political committees throughout the state. Those political committees then gave to RPOF, they gave to Uthmeier's, it's like personal political committee, that is his fundraising committee, not the one we're talking about here, and other political candidates. So the basic issue here is that nobody's ever said exactly what this $10 million was spent on, and the IRS potentially could find out.
Up next, Uthmeier's opponent in the Attorney General race, Jose Javier Rodriguez. Stay with us. Welcome back. We've been talking about the Hope Florida scandal and why the state's Attorney General won't say if he is trying to block the release of the grand jury report on Hope Florida. I invited Uthmeier to come on the show, but he didn't respond. I did, however, talk to his opponent in this year's election, former Democratic State Senator Jose Javier Rodriguez.
First of all, as Attorney General, I would focus on tackling costs and tackling corruption. This Attorney General is focused on being part of the corruption and part of the cover-up. This is part, of course, of the Hope Florida scandal, which is the biggest scandal in the DeSantis administration, where it looks like they took $10 million out of the Medicaid program and used it for campaigns. And it's under criminal investigation, this scheme. It runs right through James Uthmeier, my opponent, who was the chief of staff for the governor at the time and chaired the political committees. Up until now, he hadn't confirmed that essentially he was part of that grand jury process. The presentment is essentially an indication, or it seems pretty clear that there's a presentment. It's an indication that the grand jury found serious wrongdoing.
Well, let's be clear. He says that he did nothing wrong, and there's no indication that the grand jury indicted anyone. It appears that what their work has culminated in is a report, as you described it, a presentment that might have a series of recommendations as well as lay out some of the concerns that were raised by the mishandling or how that $10 million settlement for Medicaid was diverted into political action committees controlled by the governor and his then chief of staff, James Uthmeier. But it's not clear that anyone has been indicted. And again, to be clear, James Uthmeier has denied that he's done anything wrong and has said that he has not been indicted in the case. I think it's more revelatory, though, that whatever information the grand jury found out, whether it's good, bad, or otherwise, if it certainly exonerates the Attorney General, I would imagine he would want that out. And the fact that he doesn't seem to want this material out does raise some concerns.
Well, it raises serious concerns. No matter what the decision is here, to have the chief legal officer of the state engaged in this kind of sweeping fraudulent criminal activity is a serious issue. And to have the chief legal officer of the state refused to answer questions about this. I think he said, "Shame on you," to a reporter when asked about it. And the most he can say is that he is not currently under indictment. I mean, that's not the kind of thing you want to hear from the chief legal officer. What you want to hear, what you'll hear from me, is we're going after insurance companies. We're going after the utilities. We're making your life better. We're keeping your kids safe. Instead, all you hear from this attorney general are one scandal after the next, or one political antic trying to get attention in D.C. and not focusing on the issues that matter to us.
I want to raise one of those in a second, but first, you mentioned utilities, and also in the news this week is the Public Service Commission, the Florida that oversees Florida Power and Light, said that they will not reconsider their decision to move forward with what is one of the largest rate increases in Florida history, if not the history of the United States. What's your reaction to that?
My reaction is more than disappointment. It is outrageous that at the executive level, we have nobody standing up for us when it comes to the biggest and most powerful interests in Tallahassee. FPL came in for the biggest rate increase, biggest guaranteed profit of any investor-owned utility in the history of the country, not just Florida. And our attorney general was nowhere to be found other than just parroting their talking points, apparently trying to help them out. The FPL ratepayers are going to be saddled, if this is finally approved, with $7 billion of rate increases. We used to have attorneys general who would stand up and fight for us when we're getting screwed. We do not have that. We have the opposite. I will absolutely stand up to them. I've done that. My entire career has been about standing up for the little guy against powerful institutions.
Well, give me an idea. What realistically could you do if you were elected Attorney General? What could you do to try to rein in what Florida Power and Light seems to be able to get away with?
Thank you for that question. Intervene, investigate, bring legal actions. I would point folks to Michigan, for example, where the Attorney General in Michigan has sued utilities to recover millions for constituents and gotten active in rate cases just like this one and saved constituents millions in rate increases. If you all remember, Charlie Crist, when he was Attorney General, at least would intervene on behalf of the people, because the job is to be the people's lawyer. That's what I'm running to serve as, the people's lawyer, to fight for them. Here we have an Attorney General who will go nowhere near the Public Service Commission, other than apparently, I guess, to collect checks from the big utilities. And it's not just FPL. All the other utilities are lining up for giant rate increases, and they're looking at the guaranteed profits FPL's allowed to get, and they're going to be coming in for bigger guaranteed profits. Obviously, at a time when there's so much uncertainty and so much economic pain, all over the state, it just seems so obscene, especially. And we really need somebody in Tallahassee advocating for this. This is what I've done my whole career. It's what I'll do as Attorney General.
I know that since you entered the race, I think you've raised about $1 million for your Attorney General campaign. Honestly, in a state like Florida, that's not enough. That's not a lot.
This is not my first competitive election. Every time, the way that I serve, the way that I run is talking to all voters about issues that impact them. As Attorney General, I'll focus on rooting out crime, costs, and corruption. That's not a partisan agenda. You'll see in my career, I've always focused on issues that improve people's lives, not concerned about partisan issues. And it's true. My entire career has been about fighting the biggest, most powerful interests in Tallahassee. And that's what we need from an attorney general. It's no surprise my opponent, who serves them, has more money. That is true. I have never been outworked, but I've always been outspent. That is what I expect to happen in this race. The big interests in Tallahassee, they know what they're going to get with me, and they will spend a lot to try to prevent me. It hasn't worked in the past when it's been just about convincing voters at the ballot box, and I'm convinced that we'll prevail here because people see that we need relief, and we need an attorney general who's fighting for us.
Well, I mean, it did work in one regard. I mean, Florida Power and Light ran a campaign against you when you were running for re-election in the state Senate, putting in shadow candidates that ended up drawing voters away from you to deceive voters. So, I mean, your history with Florida Power and Light, tangling with them, I would say right now they're 1-0 against you. Florida Power and Light were able to take you out. What's going to be different this time?
Well, yeah, and what you're referencing, your viewers might remember the Republicans ran a ghost candidate in 2020. It turned out funded by FPL because they wanted to take me out. And out of 250,000 votes, I lost by less than 40. And the important point of the story is not, the victims were the voters, but I was the target of that. And it's because nobody else in Tallahassee was standing up for the forced customers of our electric utilities more than I was, and they wanted to take me out. And the same is true for a number of other interest groups, right? The big polluters, folks that want to run our rates up on a bunch of things, and no one stands up to them in Tallahassee. When I did, they were very upset. So it's not personal for me. For me, it's advocating for those I serve. But it was personal for FPL, and I'm sure it's personal for a lot of these other big special interests that are trying to screw us. So again, I don't doubt that my opponent will have more money, but that's not what wins this race.
You talked earlier about how the current Attorney General seems to try to find issues that get him certain levels of press, and I couldn't help but think when he inserted himself by announcing that the state of Florida would potentially sue or raise objections to the NFL's use of the Rooney Rule. And for those of you who don't know, the Rooney Rule simply says that for a team to hire either the head coach or the general manager, that they should include that there should be some minorities who are interviewed. It doesn't guarantee that anyone gets a job, but merely that the pool of candidates who are interviewed for those top positions include some minorities.
Well, my reaction, there are two things. Number one, he's just simply wrong. And, the NFL has already said, go pound sand. The NFL put this rule in there, in an effort to root out issues that they still very much have. And, essentially what Uthmeier seems to be concerned about is that too many minorities are getting interviewed for senior positions at teams. It's very perplexing. He doesn't seem to understand the law. He's not going to win this one. He's already losing it. And he's trying to spin this into something that it is not. But the other issue with this is that what a waste of taxpayer dollars, right? I mean, this is something he's doing for consumption in Washington, D.C. He is not doing this to improve our lives. This is not going to keep us safer. This is not going to reduce our costs. And this does nothing about the rampant corruption here in Florida.
As I said before, Attorney General Uthmeier has so far ignored our request for an interview. But if he ever changes his mind, he is always welcome to come on the show. We'll be right back. Well, that's all the time we have today. If you have any thoughts or comments, feel free to contact me at jdefede@cbs.com. Oh, how I do enjoy hearing from you. Thanks again for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day.